My spoiled sister broke into my home and destroyed my newborn's room. Now my Marine General father-in-law is forcing her into federal prison. Hello, my name is Sarah. My sister did not simply cross a line as I was bringing my kid into the world. She obliterated it. While I was screaming through contractions in the hospital, she was at my house, destroying 9 months and 10 days of love, hope, and meticulous planning. She damaged everything in my baby's nursery. She didn't count on the man who reared my husband, a 3-star Marine general who takes no prisoners when it comes to protecting his family. Lauren believed she could break me at my weakest point, but she was unaware that my strongest ally was already on his way. The first contraction hit me like a freight train at 4 a.m., blasting through my sleep and sending me bolt upright in our Maple Street bed. William was quickly awakening alongside me, his military training kicking in even while sleeping. The ache spread across my entire midsection, squeezing like a vice that someone kept tightening mercilessly. I grasped the edge of our wooden headboard, which William had constructed himself during his last leave, and tried to breathe through it like Dr. Cooper had instructed us in those countless birthing classes. The November rain was pelting against our bedroom windows, producing a rhythm that matched my fast heartbeat. Portland's weather had been exceptionally harsh this week, with storm after storm coming in from the Pacific. Our Craftsman house moaned in the wind, but it felt sturdy and safe, just like the home William and I had imagined when he was stationed overseas. The kind of place where we could finally begin our family. When the contraction finally let go, I glanced to William, who had already reached for his phone to clock the next one. His brown hair sprang up at weird angles, yet his eyes were sharp and concentrated. 3 tours in Afghanistan had trained him to wake up prepared for anything. He squeezed my hand, his calloused fingers resting gently on my palm. 25 minutes later, another wave broke over me, this time stronger. I felt myself uttering unrecognizable sounds, low and primal, as if my body had taken over totally. William was already dressed and moving across our bedroom with quiet precision, gathering the maternity bag we had packed weeks earlier. The bag sat by our dresser like a patient sentinel, loaded with tiny onesies, receiving blankets, and everything else the parenting book claimed we'd need for our daughter's birth. Emily. We had chosen her name months before, when she was still a flutter in my womb, and William was video chatting from base. It seemed right then, and it feels even more so today, as another contraction builds and peaks. This tiny girl had been our hope during William's difficult reintegration after his previous deployment, through the sleepless nights when he'd wake up grasping for weapons that weren't there, and through the gradual process of learning to be citizens together. By 6 a.m., contractions were coming every 20 minutes. William contacted Dr. Cooper, one hand placed against my lower back, where a persistent discomfort had settled in like a tenacious tenant. Our house seemed different in the early morning hours, filled with expectancy and energy. Every familiar thing appeared to carry additional meaning. The couch where we'd spent hours discussing baby names. The kitchen table was where we would spread out paint samples for the nursery. The nursery, which would soon be Emily's room, was accessible from the hallway. I'd spent months perfecting it, painting tiny woodland creatures on the soft green walls, while William put together the cot and changing table with the same care he used to field strip his rifle. We bought the rocking chair at an estate auction in Ashland, where my family lived, and I reupholstered it in cream fabric with tiny embroidered foxes. Every aspect had been chosen with care, from the mobile William's mother had sent from base housing to the bookcase, which was already stocked with children's stories that I couldn't wait to read aloud. When I contacted my mother at 7, her voice was heavy with sleep but quickly alert. Helen Carter had been waiting for this call for weeks, checking in every day with growing concern about when her first grandchild would arrive. She pledged to drive down from Ashland as soon as the roads were clear, even though the storm was making mountain passes dangerous. My father, Robert, would stay behind to run his veterinary business, but he sent his love and vowed to come down once the baby was safe. The talk I dreaded was next. William observed my expression as I browsed through my contacts to get Lauren's phone number. My sister and I had what you could call a complex relationship, and pregnancy had only made things worse. Lauren had commented on every milestone of my pregnancy, how I was rushing into motherhood, how William and I hardly knew each other before he deployed, and how military wives had such difficult lives. But she was my sister, and despite everything, I wanted her to know her niece was coming. Lauren's phone went directly to voicemail. I left a message between contractions, trying to maintain a steady voice as I stated that we would be going to the hospital soon. Half of me was happy that I didn't have to have an actual conversation with her while experiencing labor pains, but another half felt the old sting of disappointment. Lauren was mysteriously absent at a time when I needed family support the most. Dr. Cooper's office called again around 8:30, telling us to go to Riverside Medical Center. The contractions were getting stronger, hitting every 10 minutes with a power that made me grab whatever was nearest. William's arm, the automobile door handle, and the wheelchair armrest that they used to enter the hospital. The rain had subsided into a steady drizzle, and the early light was gloomy and muted as we drove through vacant Portland streets. Riverside Medical Center appeared before us like a blaze of glass and steel and modern efficiency. William drove up to the maternity entrance, and within minutes I was in a wheelchair, being rolled through automatic doors as he parked. The hospital odor hit me right away. Antiseptic and floor wax were blended with something I couldn't identify. This place where medical specialists helped bring new life into the world should have been reassuring, yet it felt overpowering and unfamiliar. Room 216 became our temporary residence, a room adorned in soothing blues with a huge window facing the hospital's courtyard garden. The trees outside were mostly bare now, with dark branches against the gray sky, but someone had strung tiny white lights through them, twinkling like stars. Nurse Angela Reed greeted me with a kind smile and capable hands before taking my vitals and assisting me into the hospital gown, which made me feel exposed and vulnerable. The following few hours passed in a whirl of growing pain and medical monitoring. Dr. Cooper came at 9 a.m., her typically beautiful hair slightly tousled due to the early call. She checked on my progress with professional efficiency, saying that I was 4 centimeters dilated and Emily was anxious to meet us. William held my hand during each contraction, his presence solid and soothing, even when I clenched his fingers hard enough to leave marks. Around lunchtime, my mother came, hurrying into the room with bags of snacks and a tense energy that filled the air. She hugged William passionately, thanked him for taking such wonderful care of me, and then immediately began rearranging the flowers that had been sent and sorting the objects on my bedside table. Helen Carter demonstrated love through action, by doing, fixing and organizing, and I could see her struggle with the fact that there was little she could do but wait. The contractions were now coming every 10 minutes, robbing my breath and demanding all of my attention. I attempted to rest between them, but my thoughts kept straying back to the nursery at home. I imagined Emily's crib being made with such care. The mobile hanging above it casts lovely shadows on the wall, the bedside, wipes, and other small essentials of newborn life, the rocking chair where I intended to milk her, sing lullabies, and watch her develop. During one of these mental retreats, my phone vibrated with a text message. Lauren had finally responded to my voicemail from hours earlier. The message was brief and primarily self-centered. "I can't make it today. Have plans. Good luck, I suppose." I stared at the computer, experiencing a familiar mix of pain and melancholy. Lauren couldn't even show up or seem to care today as I welcomed her niece into the world. William noticed the frown on my face and looked at my phone. His jaw tightened slightly, as it did when he was managing his fury. He'd never said anything blatantly negative about Lauren, but I knew he'd recognized a pattern in her behavior during the months we'd been together. The way she undermined my happiness, took subtle barbs at our relationship, and questioned every decision we made about the wedding, the house, and the pregnancy. Another contraction grew and crested, stronger than the others, and I completely forgot about Lauren. This was bigger than her petty jealousies and attention-seeking tendencies. This was about carefully bringing our daughter into the world, and about the family William and I were building together. Nothing else mattered in that moment, but the life growing inside me, and the man holding my hand. Dr. Cooper returned around 3 o'clock, announcing that I was 8 centimeters dilated, and that everything was going well. The pain was unrelenting now, going from one contraction to the next with barely enough time to catch my breath in between. Nurse Angela altered my posture, assisting me in finding the most comfortable position imaginable, as my mother hovered close with ice chips and supportive words. This is when William's phone rang. His father's name appeared on the screen, and William stepped into the hallway to receive the call. General Derek Grant didn't call very frequently, but when he did, it was typically serious. Through the open door I could hear pieces of William's speech. "Yes, sir. Today. Any time now." His voice reflected the innate reverence and formality that he felt whenever he spoke to his father. Even though their relationship had improved significantly since our wedding, William returned with a new expression. Not precisely worried, but I noticed a sense of readiness in his military bearing. He clasped my hand and leaned down to whisper that his father was flying in from base and would arrive by the evening if all went as planned. I had a burst of thankfulness coupled with surprise. General Grant was not known for making great gestures or displaying emotion, but the birth of his first grandchild seemed to deserve a cross-country trip. The afternoon continued in a whirl of rising intensity. Each contraction demanded more of me, necessitating greater concentration and regulated breathing. William guided me through each one, his voice firm and encouraging, while my mother supplied continual support with ice chips. Nurse Angela checked in on us on a regular basis, keeping an eye on Emily's heart rate and my development with professionalism. Around 5 o'clock, another text message from Lauren flashed on my phone. This one was lengthier and seemed harsher than her previous dismissal. "Emily, you are not expecting a baby shower or anything. Some of us have real lives and cannot drop everything for a minor drama." I glanced at the message, tears pricking my eyes. Even now, she couldn't help but minimize the situation, making it about herself and her perceived hardships. I showed my mother the message, which she read with growing dismay. Helen had spent years attempting to arbitrate between Lauren and me, making excuses for Lauren's actions and asking me to be understanding of her difficulties. But something changed in her look as she read Lauren's comments. My mother's face hardened in a manner I'd rarely seen, either due to the time or the fact that Lauren's brutality was finally laid naked in black and white. Before she could react, another powerful contraction struck, and I forgot about everything except breathing through the pain. Dr. Cooper arrived as if called, evaluating my progress and pronouncing with satisfaction that I was fully dilated. It was time to shove. It's time to meet our daughter. It was time to complete everything we had been working on for 9 months. The next hour was the most difficult physical test I had ever experienced. Each push required all of my strength and commitment. William stayed at my side, counting each push and supporting me when I wanted to give up. My mother clutched my other hand, tears running down her cheeks as she saw her daughter bring fresh life into this world. Finally, at 5:47 p.m., Emily Elizabeth Grant was born on a bleak November evening with a cry that broke through the pain and tiredness like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Dr. Cooper placed her to my chest. This tiny, exquisite creature had William's dark hair and eyes that appeared to perceive everything. She was real. She was here. She was ours. The room was filled with the gentle emotion of new life. William's eyes were filled with unshed tears as he caressed Emily's tiny hand with one finger, admiring her exquisite miniature fingernails. My mother was crying openly, reaching out with shaking fingers to stroke Emily's cheek. Nurse Angela bustled around us, taking care of the medical needs while we enjoyed our first precious moments as a family. After the initial thrill had subsided and Emily had been washed, measured, and declared perfect in every way, I was finally able to check my phone. People who had been following my pregnancy journey sent me messages of congratulations and well wishes. However, there was something that made my blood run cold. Lauren had texted again only 30 minutes earlier. "Finally got your key back from Mom. Thank you for letting me borrow it. I needed to pick up something I left at your apartment. Don't worry, I was extremely careful with everything." The timestamp on the communication was 5:15 p.m. Lauren had been at our house with a key she'd borrowed weeks ago, and allegedly never returned when I was in the final stages of labor and giving birth to Emily. My hands began shaking as I read the message again, trying to figure out why she needed to come to our house today of all days. William saw my expression and leaned over to read the message. His face became very still, as it does when he is evaluating a potential threat. He quickly contacted our neighbor, Mrs. Robinson, who had a view of our front yard from her kitchen window. The discussion was quick, but he hung up with a sad face. Mrs. Robinson noticed Lauren's automobile in our driveway at 5 o'clock. She'd also heard what sounded like pounding or building noises from within the house, but she assumed we were having an emergency repair done. The noise lasted for 15 minutes, and then stopped. Lauren's automobile left shortly after. A chilly dread was growing through my chest, conflicting with the weariness and overpowering emotion of having recently given birth. Something wasn't right. Something was extremely wrong. Lauren's statement about being extra careful felt mocking, as if she was telling me she did something on purpose while knowing I couldn't stop her. William was already loading up our home security app on his phone, which we had installed before his last deployment to provide us with peace of mind. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, accessing video feeds from within our home. What we saw made my mother gasp, and William's jaw clenched with barely contained wrath. The nursery camera captured full destruction. The crib was turned over, its meticulously assembled pieces spilled across the floor. The changing table had been knocked over, spilling diapers and supplies everywhere. The rocking chair I had carefully reupholstered was on its side, the cloth shredded. William had spent hours hanging the mobile perfectly, but it was now broken on the floor. Its beautiful woodland creatures are crushed and scattered. The worst part, however, was the walls. The lovely mural I had spent weeks painting, the sweet foxes, deer, and rabbits that were going to greet Emily home, had been ruined. Someone had used what appeared to be a hammer or sledgehammer on the drywall, leaving big holes and fragments of plaster scattered around the floor. Paint cans had been opened and flung, leaving red and black stripes over the gentle green walls, much like wounds. Emily stirred in my arms and made a little squeak, which made me realize I was holding her too tightly. The room felt like it was spinning, and I couldn't get enough air in my lungs. 9 months of preparation, love, and meticulous planning were all ruined in 15 minutes by someone who was supposed to care about me. While I was bringing new life into the world, my sister was destroying the environment designed to foster that life. My mother was terrified, staring at William's phone screen, one palm pressed to her mouth. She had protected Lauren for years, made excuses for her actions, and insisted that Lauren genuinely loved me. However, there was no defending this. There was no explanation for this other than deliberate cruelty. William was already holding his phone, his fingers moving with military precision across the screen. He was phoning someone, his voice tense with repressed wrath. It took me a while to realize he was calling his father, General Grant, who should arrive in Portland within an hour. The talk was brief and professional, but I could hear William's resolve as he told what had occurred. Whatever his father said in return, William's demeanor changed from fury to something resembling satisfaction. When he hung up, he turned to me with kind eyes and a voice that promised swift retribution. His father was already on his way to our house, escorted by 2 of his assistants from the trip. They'd secure the scene and document everything before we returned home. More crucially, General Grant was making decisions on his own, leveraging relationships and resources that Lauren could not have predicted. As I cradled my newborn daughter and looked at the photographs of destruction on William's phone, I felt something shift inside me. Lauren's jealousy and inability to cope with not being the center of attention were no longer the only issues here. This was about someone targeting my family, my child, and my house at a time when we were most vulnerable. Lauren had made a horrible mistake. She anticipated that I would be too preoccupied with labor and delivery to recognize what she was doing until it was too late. She expected to have hours, if not days, before we noticed the destruction, giving her time to come up with an excuse or find someone else to blame. She hadn't realized that targeting a Marine's family meant declaring war on individuals who understood exactly how to fight back. And she hadn't anticipated General Derek "Tank" Grant taking a personal interest in the case. Emily opened her eyes and gazed up at me with the unfocused glance of a baby, as if she was still adjusting to this bright new world. Her small fingers curled around my finger with surprising strength, and I felt a wave of protectiveness pass through me. This was my daughter, and no one was going to harm her or jeopardize the future we were creating for her. The existence itself was based on the dreams and hopes that William and I had put into that space. However, when I looked down upon my gorgeous, healthy baby, I realized Lauren had failed in the most fundamental sense. She destroyed items, but she couldn't get to what was truly important. She could not break the tie between William and me. We couldn't stop loving our daughter, we couldn't stop ourselves from being a family. Nurse Angela returned to check on us, taking one look at our faces and immediately asked whether we were okay. When William briefly explained what had occurred, her attitude changed from professional worry to personal outrage. She informed us she'd been a labor and delivery nurse for 15 years and had never heard of something so purposely nasty. Dr. Cooper visited shortly after, having learned of the incident from the nursing staff. She offered to keep us in the hospital for another day if we needed time to deal with the situation at home. She also highlighted that the hospital provided support for families struggling with domestic issues. Lauren's acts felt more genuine and serious because medical professionals were addressing them as a kind of domestic violence. Around 7 o'clock, as we were talking logistics and figuring out how to deal with the immediate aftermath, William's phone rang again. When General Grant's name showed on the screen, William responded with the automatic, "Yes sir," that still made me grin under normal circumstances. The talk lasted longer this time, with William largely listening and occasionally answering with, "Copy that," or "Understood." When he hung up, his expression changed. Not precisely satisfaction, but rather a dismal expectancy. His father had arrived at our home and assessed the magnitude of the damage. He'd also made some preliminary queries regarding Lauren's whereabouts and learned some interesting details about her recent actions. Apparently, my sister had been busier than any of us anticipated, and not in ways that would benefit her when the matter reached its inevitable end. The most crucial piece of news was that General Grant had phoned the local police and filed a report for breaking and entering, property destruction, and what the officers considered a hate crime due to the timing and premeditated nature of the attack. Lauren's use of my mother's key did not grant her legal authorization to enter the house and destroy things, especially because we were abroad dealing with a medical emergency. As the evening progressed and visiting hours came to an end, my mother struggled to accept the truth of Lauren's actions. She had spent years shielding Lauren, making excuses for her behavior, and attempting to keep the family together by persuading everyone else to ignore Lauren's increasingly troublesome actions. However, this could not be overlooked. Emily slept quietly in my arms, utterly oblivious of the drama surrounding her introduction into the world. She was perfect and innocent, and looking at her helped me focus on what was most important. Lauren could damage items, but she couldn't affect the love that had created this child or the family who would protect her. The future, which had seemed so obvious and straightforward 12 hours earlier, suddenly appeared convoluted and unclear. We'd have to rebuild the nursery, replace everything that had been destroyed, and find out how to continue living as a family while dealing with the legal and emotional fallout from Lauren's attack. But when I saw William hold his daughter for the first time, his face soft with surprise and fierce with protective love, I knew we'd figure it out together. Lauren believed she had selected the ideal time to break me, to remind me that she could ruin anything I cared about whenever she wanted. But she had chosen the worst possible moment for herself. Because she wasn't only dealing with her little sister anymore. She was dealing with a Marine family that would not allow attacks on their own. And General Derek Grant was ready to show her precisely what that meant. That first night in the hospital, Emily's feeding schedule and the steady hum of medical equipment kept her from sleeping well. Every time I fell asleep, my mind would return to those security camera photographs, repeating the carnage in vivid detail, the overturned crib, the shattered mobile, the huge holes in the walls I'd painted with such love and expectation. Each time I awoke, reality slammed me hard and fast, like stepping on jagged glass in bare feet. William had scarcely slept, spending the majority of the night walking between the window and my bedside, his phone continually vibrating with updates from his father. General Grant had spent the evening collaborating with local police, documenting every aspect of the destruction, and conducting investigations that appeared to reach far beyond our small suburban home in Beaverton. Even someone on his side found his military precision soothing and slightly terrifying. Around 3 a.m., as I was nursing Emily in the dark hospital room lighting, William finally revealed some of what his father had uncovered. Lauren's attack on our nursery was not as unexpected as it first appeared. She'd been preparing something for weeks, ever since my mother proposed giving her the spare key so she could water our plants while we were in hospital. Security footage from our neighbor's doorbell camera shows Lauren driving by our house several times in the last 2 weeks, evidently timing her surveillance to avoid times when William would be home on leave. But the most disturbing finding was what General Grant discovered on Lauren's social media sites. She'd been recording her hatred toward me and William in private posts that only a few of her closest friends could see. Screenshots collected by the police through legitimate legal means revealed months of increasingly caustic commentary about my pregnancy, marriage, and what she described as my ideal little military wife fantasy. The posts demonstrated a level of malice and premeditation that made my stomach turn. One post from 3 weeks ago was especially disturbing. Some people need to understand that they cannot expect to be given everything they want. Sometimes reality has to crash down on them, especially if they are too distracted to notice it. Another, posted just 5 days before Emily's birth, was considerably more explicit. Counting down the days till the tiny princess's reality check. Maybe she'll comprehend what the rest of us have been going through. My mother came early that morning, appearing as if she had aged years overnight. The lady who had spent decades defending Lauren, making excuses for her actions, and arguing that family should always forgive family, was having difficulty reconciling the sister she thought she knew with the proof of premeditated cruelty. She sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, clutching Emily, tears running down her cheeks as she apologized repeatedly for not realizing what Lauren had become. The chat with my mother was one of the most difficult I had ever had. Years of buried frustration and overlooked occurrences spilled out as we finally recognized Lauren's pattern of accomplishments. The intentionally unpleasant remarks disguised as jokes. She had eroded my confidence prior to crucial events, and then pretended to be astonished when things did not go as planned. The relentless competition that I had no desire to participate in but couldn't seem to avoid. My mother expressed her own shame, explaining how she had facilitated Lauren's behavior by always adopting the path of least resistance. It was easier to urge me to be understanding than to confront Lauren with her conduct. It's easier to smooth things up than to establish solid boundaries. She persuaded herself she was keeping her family together. But suddenly she realized that she'd been shielding Lauren from the consequences of her actions, while leaving me susceptible to increasingly aggressive attacks. Dr. Cooper made her rounds at 8 a.m., checking on Emily's feeding and my healing. When she noticed the distress on all of our faces, she politely inquired about our home situation. After William quickly recounted what had transpired, she instantly volunteered to prolong our hospital stay for another day or two. She had seen families struggling with domestic difficulties previously, and she stressed that racing home to a disturbed atmosphere with a newborn was not good for anyone's mental health. The relief I felt from not having to face the ruined nursery right away was immense. Emily needed a tranquil, peaceful setting for her first few days of life, and I needed time to digest what had happened, without being constantly reminded of Lauren's attack. William enthusiastically accepted Dr. Cooper's offer and proceeded into the hallway to inform his father about our extended chronology. General Grant came at the hospital at 10 a.m., and his presence immediately transformed the atmosphere in our room. He was everything you'd expect from a 3-star Marine general. Tall, dominating, with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to absorb everything at once. But when he saw Emily asleep in my arms, his entire manner softened into something resembling wonder. He brought flowers for me and a small pink teddy bear for Emily, which seemed out of place for a man who had previously commanded thousands of men. His congrats, however, were sincere and kind. When he held his granddaughter for the first time, his hands were unexpectedly kind, despite their apparent strength. For a few moments, we were simply a regular family enjoying a new arrival. When the subject switched to Lauren, General Grant's demeanor changed back to military mode. He had spent the previous evening working with local police enforcement and had some new information that changed everything about our predicament. Lauren's destruction of the nursery was being investigated as a felony owing to the extent of the damage and the deliberate nature of the act. The security footage, together with her social media posts and the time of the occurrence, formed a strong picture of intentional criminal action. But there was more. General Grant had utilized his connections to conduct a background check on Lauren, as he did with anyone who could represent a security concern to his family. He observed a trend of identical behavior extending back years. She had been fired from 2 previous jobs due to workplace harassment and property destruction. A previous roommate had obtained a restraining order against her, accusing her of purposefully damaging a graduate school application. Most recently, she was embroiled in a civil lawsuit with a former business partner who claimed Lauren damaged computer equipment and information following a disagreement. The image that developed was of someone with a lengthy history of employing devastation and sabotage to harm others in a violent, unique, or personal manner. It was part of a larger pattern that had been developing for years. The information was both upsetting and oddly validating. I wasn't insane or oversensitive to feel targeted by Lauren's behavior. She was actually dangerous, and I'd been living in the crossfire without completely comprehending the gravity of the situation. General Grant stated that the police were prepared to arrest Lauren, but they were working with his security team to make the procedure run smoothly. As a military family, we had access to certain benefits and resources that civilian families may not have. The base's legal assistance office was already planning to assist us with both the criminal case and any civil lawsuit that might arise. Around lunchtime, William's phone rang with a call from Detective Sarah Perez, who was working our case. The chat was brief, but it had been a particularly trying weekend. Lauren had been located and brought in for questioning. Her initial answer had been to deny everything, stating she had merely gone by our house to get a sweater she had left there months before. However, when presented with security footage and social media information, her explanation immediately fell apart. The investigator wanted to meet with us at the hospital to obtain our formal statements and show us the new evidence they had obtained. She also wanted to talk about safety precautions, as Lauren's behavior history indicated that she would escalate more if faced with penalties for her acts. The idea that we may require protection from my own sister seemed absurd, but the detective's fear was genuine and founded on professional experience. Detective Perez arrived that afternoon, carrying a tablet full of evidence, and taking a kind but comprehensive approach to gathering our statements. She went us through Lauren's planned timeline, giving us doorbell camera footage from several neighbors that documented her surveillance of our home. There were photographs of her sitting in her car across the street, observing our windows and presumably timing when the lights turned on and off to establish our routine. When the social media data was examined as a whole, it became even more devastating. Lauren had been creating a grievance narrative against me for months, depicting herself as the victim of my good fortune, and my happiness as something stolen from her. The posts demonstrated a worldview in which other people's success was interpreted as a personal attack on her, and any achievement by someone else necessitated vengeance to restore equilibrium. Lauren appeared to be investigating the timing of labor and delivery in the weeks preceding up to Emily's birth, presumably in order to determine when I would be most vulnerable and least able to respond to an attack. She'd even looked up how long typical hospital stays for new mothers were, presumably to determine how much time she'd have to accomplish her destruction before we came home. Detective Perez noted that this level of premeditation increased the charges dramatically. What could have been seen as a family squabble or an emotional outburst was definitely a planned criminal attack. The data revealed that someone had spent a significant amount of time and energy intending to inflict the most psychological damage at the time when it would be most painful. My mother listened to all of this with increasing horror, realizing the full extent of Lauren's transformation. Her daughter, whom she had shielded and defended for years, was more than just troubled or jealous. She was truly dangerous. Lauren's record of escalating behavior indicated that without action, she would have continued to target me and now my family in increasingly destructive ways. Around 3 o'clock we got another call that changed everything again. Lauren had been legally detained and charged with breaking and entering, property destruction, harassment, and what the district attorney's office described as serious criminal mischief owing to the timing and forethought. Her bond was made particularly high due to the flight risk assessment and a history of similar behavior in her background. However, Lauren had supposedly attempted to contact me several times from the police station, leaving increasingly panicked voicemails that were now part of the evidence against her. In these messages, she alternated between crying apologies and aggressive excuses, leaving a clear audio record of her fragile mental condition and her persistent obsession with me. The final voicemail was very distressing. "You believe you're great with your ideal husband and baby, but I know who you truly are. I know what you did to obtain what you have, and I will make sure everyone else knows as well. This is not over, Sarah. This is only the beginning." The threat was obvious and unambiguous, ruling out the likelihood that her attack on the nursery was an isolated act motivated by temporary emotional turmoil. General Grant responded to this menace quickly and comprehensively. Within hours he had arranged for security people to monitor both our home and the hospital. He'd also launched a broader investigation into Lauren's actions and associations, viewing her as more than just a family issue, but a potential security threat to military people. The resources at his disposal to safeguard his family were remarkable and little daunting, but also immensely reassuring considering Lauren's growing conduct. That evening, as we prepared to spend our second night at the hospital, I had a new perspective on the nursery. Lauren's destruction was intended to shatter me, to make me feel insecure and violated in my own home. But, surrounded by family and shielded by resources I never dreamed I'd need, I felt something I hadn't felt in years while coping with Lauren's minor cruelties. A clean, focused wrath at someone who had assaulted my child and my family. The woman lying in that hospital bed with her newborn daughter was not the same person who had spent years attempting to reconcile with someone determined to destroy her happiness. Motherhood had awakened something terrible and protective that was not content with merely repairing what had been destroyed. William appeared to see the shift in me as we spoke gently as Emily slept between us. His rage was chilly and controlled, reflecting the strategic thinking that had made him an outstanding military leader. We were no longer only the victims of Lauren's attack. We were parents with a child to protect. That fundamentally altered our approach to the matter. The chat we had that night was about more than simply Lauren and the wrecked nursery. It was about who we wanted to be as a family, what sort of life we wanted to live, and how far we were willing to go to safeguard that. We'd been reacting for far too long, allowing Lauren's actions to determine our replies and limit our options. Now we were going to be proactive. General Grant came by late that evening with updates that proved our new perspective was spot on. Lauren's detention appears to have prompted a meltdown, resulting in additional accusations of disturbing the peace and resisting police. More importantly, the examination into her background found that she was now being investigated by her company for embezzlement, which could explain her recent financial hardship and probably her rising attacks on my stability. The picture was getting clearer. Lauren wasn't simply envious of my happiness. She was watching her own life fall apart as a result of her poor decisions and criminal actions. Attacking me and my family was both an attempt to bring me down to her level and a desperate attempt to divert attention away from her own difficulties by causing disruption in someone else's life. But her estimates had been profoundly incorrect. She'd attacked someone who was no longer alone and helpless, but instead had the security and resources of a military family. More crucially, she attacked at a time when others who cared about me were most likely to respond with overwhelming power. As I drifted off to sleep that second night, holding my daughter and listening to my husband's steady breathing beside me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years for Lauren. I felt safe, not because the immediate threat had passed, but because I realized I had the strength and support to confront whatever came next. Lauren tried to shatter my sense of security and happiness at a time when I was most vulnerable. Instead, she'd reawakened a protective instinct and gathered resources to ensure she never threatened my family again. Tomorrow will bring fresh obstacles as we worked through the legal procedure and began reconstructing what she had damaged. But tonight, we were united, safe, and ready for a completely different answer than Lauren had anticipated. The woman who had spent years attempting to maintain peace with an increasingly dangerous individual had vanished. In her place was a mother who would go to any length to protect her child, as well as a military wife who recognized that some conflicts necessitated complete triumph over brief truces. Lauren was about to figure out precisely what that meant. The third morning brought an unexpected guest, who altered the entire course of our circumstance. Martha Grant, General Grant's wife and Emily's paternal grandmother, arrived at the hospital before dawn with the quiet efficiency that comes from years of military spouse experience. She walked into our room with coffee that actually tasted delicious, handmade muffins that made the hospital breakfast look like cardboard, and a steely determination that reminded me of where William received his backbone. Martha had flown in from Camp Pendleton right after her husband's phone call, but she had not come to offer compassion or soft consolation. She had come to take action. Within an hour of her arrival, she had transformed our tight hospital room into a command center, equipped with laptops, legal documents, and a communication system that kept us updated on developments across different states. The news she delivered was both terrible and empowering. Lauren's company had gone forward with their embezzlement inquiry, learning that she had taken approximately $50,000 over the previous 8 months using a sophisticated plan including bogus vendor accounts and falsified expense reports. The timing was not coincidence. Lauren's financial misdeeds had escalated as my pregnancy proceeded, as if my impending happiness had pushed her to greater desperate means. However, Martha's most crucial contribution was not information, it was about perspective. She'd spent 30 years as a military spouse, coping with dangers to her family ranging from international deployments to home security issues. She saw Lauren's incident as a deliberate assault on military troops that demanded a comprehensive response, rather than a family feud gone wrong. The contrast in approach was instantly noticeable. Whereas my mother sought to understand Lauren's intentions and find ways to mend the family breach, Martha was more concerned with neutralizing the threat and ensuring that it would never happen again. Whereas I was focused about reconstructing the nursery and moving on, Martha was thinking about long-term ramifications that would prevent Lauren from targeting other family members again. Her first step was to contact the base's Family Readiness Group, a network of military spouses who specialize in assisting families in distress. Within hours, volunteers were planning everything from interim accommodation to trauma-specific cleaning services. The efficiency was astonishing and incredibly reassuring, like being surrounded in a blanket of expert care. However, Martha's most critical conversation was with the base's legal help office, specifically with Major Rachel Williams, who specialized in domestic security situations involving military families. Major Williams had vast experience dealing with cases in which civilian family members constituted a security risk to active military people, and Lauren's case fit several troubling trends. The legal advice provided choices that I had not before recognized existed. Because William was an active-duty military member, and Lauren's attack targeted his family during a vulnerable time, her conduct may be tried under federal statutes that carried even higher penalties than state charges alone. More crucially, the military could issue protective orders that would be enforced nationwide, as opposed to civilian restraining orders, which were limited to individual counties. Major Williams stated that Lauren's record of behavior, along with her documented threats and financial offenses, classified her as a persistent threat to unit readiness. This designation indicated that her case would be treated with the same gravity as threats from foreign agents or domestic terrorists. The resources available to safeguard military families from such threats were vast and would be in place permanently. The chat also showed something I hadn't realized about Lauren's timing. She had not only selected a time when I was physically vulnerable to assault Emily at her birth. She had chosen a time when William was nominally on family leave, so any disruption to his emotional or mental state was a direct attack on military readiness. Her activities were not solely criminal, they were potentially traitorous under some federal statutes. Around midday, Detective Perez called with an update that changed our predicament yet again. Lauren was released on bail, despite the exorbitant sum imposed. Apparently, she had contacted a bail bondsman who specialized in high-risk offenders and was able to negotiate her release using funds that the police were still looking for. The news should have been alarming, but Martha's initial reaction was cool satisfaction. Lauren's decision to post bond rather than remain in detention was exactly what Martha had hoped for. Anyone who remained in custody could only face the charges that had already been filed against them. Someone who was free to travel around could be observed, tracked, and possibly caught in future criminal acts, negating any chance of a favorable punishment or successful appeal. General Grant arrived within an hour after Lauren's release, accompanied by 2 plainclothes security specialists who would keep an eye on our family as well as Lauren's movements. The surveillance was not only protective, but also inquisitive. Every action Lauren took while on bond would be noted, and might be used as evidence of continued threats or violations of her bail conditions. The afternoon brought a phone call that highlighted how completely Lauren had undervalued the resources available to her. My mother called in distress, reporting that Lauren had arrived at her home requesting money, a place to stay, and emotional support. When my mother refused and urged that Lauren seek professional help, Lauren supposedly became enraged, prompting my mother to call the police. The event at my mother's house was filmed on her home security system, providing incontrovertible evidence that Lauren threatened both my mother and my family. More importantly, video revealed Lauren breaking her bail conditions by threatening the families of her claimed victims. The bond breach alone was enough to get her jailed again, but the threats added to the evidence in the federal case that was quietly being built against her. Martha's response to this development was prompt and thorough. She promptly arranged for my mother to be transported to Portland under protective supervision, both to secure her safety and to keep her out of Lauren's grasp. My mother's residence would be monitored by both local and federal agents, setting up a trap for Lauren if she returned. Every action she did while out on bond was now being logged and contributed to a growing dossier of evidence. But the most important call came late that afternoon from Major Williams in the base legal office. The federal inquiry into Lauren's conduct revealed linkages that elevated her case above the level of domestic violence or property destruction. Her embezzlement scheme involved vendors with government contracts, hence her financial offenses fell under federal jurisdiction. Her attacks on a military family during her husband's vacation constituted interference with military operations. Most crucially, her documented threats against military troops and their families brought her case under the jurisdiction of federal domestic terrorism laws. Lauren's shift from bothersome family member to federal criminal suspect was mind-boggling, but it also brought a level of safety and justice that I never dreamed imaginable. The resources brought to bear on her weren't merely for punishment, they were intended to ensure that she never threatened military families again. Her case was being used as a precedent for how similar threats might be handled in the future. That evening, as we prepared for our final night at the hospital, I found myself thinking about the nursery differently once more. Lauren's attack was meant to undermine my sense of security and happiness, but it also revealed strengths and resources I had no idea I possessed. The wrecked chamber would be rebuilt, but by a family that recognized their own strength and had access to protection Lauren couldn't match. William spent the evening on conversations with his commanding officer, planning his return to active duty and assuring that the situation with Lauren did not jeopardize his military service. The conversation indicated an unexpected level of support. William's unit had been briefed on the situation and was ready to provide additional security and resources as needed. His fellow Marines were more than just comrades. They were brothers who took threats against their family personally. Emily seemed oblivious to the drama surrounding her birth, lying quietly in my arms while her family mobilized resources from numerous states and federal agencies. Looking at her exquisite tiny face, I felt a strong sense of pride in the family she was born into and the protection she has received from birth. Martha spent the evening making lists and phone calls with the same efficiency she had most likely used to plan military home movements for 3 decades. By morning, we'd have temporary accommodation while our house was being rebuilt, expert counseling services to help us process the trauma, and a robust security plan in place to guarantee Lauren never threatened our family again. Her most essential contribution, however, was to help me comprehend that I was no longer a victim. I was a military spouse with access to resources and safety that most civilians never had. I was a mother who had the full support of my military family. Most significantly, I was no longer the secluded young woman whom Lauren had been pursuing for years. I was part of a community that looked after its own and would not accept threats to its families. The conversation we had that evening about redoing the nursery was unlike any other I'd had concerning Lauren. We weren't discussing how to manage her behavior or how to live peacefully together. We discussed totally neutralizing her power to threaten our family while ensuring she received full consequences for her conduct. The military's approach to issue solving was comprehensive and lasting, rather than transitory or conditional. Around 10 a.m., General Grant received a call that filled the room with grim satisfaction. Lauren had been detained again, this time at a hotel near the Oregon-California border, where she had allegedly planned to exit the state. Her arrest violated many bail terms and revealed proof of guilt, which would bolster the government case against her. The hotel arrest also found fresh evidence, raising the charges against her even higher. Lauren's hotel room had comprehensive preparations for future attacks against our family, including surveillance images of Williams' base housing and research into security standards at military family facilities. She hadn't merely attacked our nursery in a fit of rage. She had planned an extensive campaign of harassment and intimidation against a military family. The discovery of more plotting documents elevated Lauren's case from domestic violence to domestic terrorism under federal law. The terms she now faced included potential decades in federal jail, with no chance of moderate plea deals like those available in state courts. More crucially, her conviction would result in permanent limitations prohibiting her from ever visiting military installations or people. As we settled in during our final night at the hospital, I had never felt anything like it before with Lauren. I felt free, not just safe from imminent danger, but truly emancipated from years of living on eggshells around someone who had been rising toward this level of violence all along. The sister who had terrorized me for years was now experiencing penalties proportionate to the scale of her acts. Emily stirred in my arms, making the little sounds that newborns make while asleep, and I knew that her arrival signaled not just the start of her life, but also the end of Lauren's power to dictate mine. The nursery would be recreated, but by a family who recognized their own strength and had access to protection that no single individual could match. William reached out to stroke Emily's small hand, his own hands calm and confident, reminding me of why I fell in love with a Marine in the first place. He'd faced far more serious challenges overseas than one unstable family member, and he responded to Lauren's attack with the same strategic thought and complete response that had kept him alive in combat. Martha gathered her documents and computers with satisfied efficiency, her work for the day completed but her vigilance still active. She turned what could have been a terrible attack into an opportunity to permanently eliminate a threat, while exhibiting the type of family strength Lauren had never imagined existed. Tomorrow, we'd return home to a house that was being expertly restored and secured by professionals who knew exactly what they were guarding. Lauren would face the full weight of federal criminal penalties while setting an example for anybody else who would contemplate endangering military families. Emily would grow up in a family that had demonstrated its ability to safeguard what mattered most. The woman who had spent years attempting to control Lauren's increasingly dangerous behavior had vanished. In her place was a military spouse who recognized that some risks necessitated comprehensive removal rather than continuing management. Lauren had planned to break me at my most vulnerable, but she had instead awoken resources and strength that would safeguard my family for years to come. As I drifted off to sleep clutching my daughter, I felt a sense of thankfulness for Lauren's attack, not for the suffering she'd inflicted, but for revealing exactly who my actual family was and what they were capable of when something they protected was endangered. She had intended to destroy my happiness, but she had shown that it was based on foundations she could never touch. When we arrived at the federal courts in Portland on Thursday morning, 3 weeks after Emily's birth, it felt like we had entered another universe. Lauren's case had progressed far beyond family court or state criminal processes, as evidenced by the building's towering granite front and considerable security presence. This was where major federal offenses were tried, defendants risked decades in federal prison, and the whole weight of the government's resources was used to combat threats to national security. Major Williams had arranged for us to enter through a private entrance, avoiding the media circus that had erupted around Lauren's case. Apparently, the story of a lady who targeted a military family during childbirth sparked national interest, particularly among military communities and domestic violence advocacy groups. The case was used as an example of how threats against military families would be pursued to the utmost extent possible under federal law. Emily slept soundly in her carrier, entirely ignorant that she was going to witness the gradual deconstruction of someone who had planned to torment her from the moment she was born. She was prospering at 3 weeks old, despite the drama surrounding her arrival. Her pediatrician had proclaimed her completely healthy and developing normally, a monument to the safe atmosphere we'd managed to build despite Lauren's best attempts. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, yet it was packed with an intensity that made the air feel charged. Federal prosecutors sat at one table, holding paperwork that appeared to encompass Lauren's whole life history, while her court-appointed attorney appeared overwhelmed by the amount of evidence against his client. General Grant sat in the gallery with the demeanor of a man used to seeing justice served, while Martha held Emily with the soft confidence of someone who has reared children through several military crises. Lauren was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, and I barely recognized the sister who used to dominate family dinners with her presence and thoughts. 3 weeks in federal jail had peeled away the polished facade she'd always maintained, revealing someone who appeared smaller, desperate, and suddenly aware that her actions had consequences she couldn't control or avoid. Assistant U.S. Attorney Monica Chang delivered Lauren's case with clinical precision, leaving little room for pity or mitigation. Since Lauren's arrest, the accusations have been expanded to include wire fraud, money laundering, cyberstalking, interstate transportation in aid of racketeering, and domestic terrorism under federal legislation aimed at protecting government people and their families. Lauren faced 7 separate counts of wire fraud, each of which could result in a 20-year sentence. The money laundering accusations added another 20 years, while the domestic terrorism allegations could result in life terms under federal guidelines. The cumulative effect was startling, ruling out the idea of a moderate plea deal in state court. The evidence presentation, however, proved how totally Lauren had miscalculated the resources stacked against her. Federal agents had rebuilt not only her recent crimes, but also a nearly decade-long pattern of growing criminal behavior. Bank data, social media posts, work records, and surveillance footage from numerous states all presented a picture of someone who had spent their entire adult life manipulating, stealing, and systematically destroying the prosperity of others. The financial crimes were especially devastating because they demonstrated premeditation and sophistication, contradicting any claims of emotional instability or transitory poor judgment. Lauren had used stolen identities to open bogus vendor accounts, manipulated computer systems to authorize fraudulent payments, and laundered the stolen funds through a network of accounts across many states. The conspiracy took months to organize and execute, indicating criminal capabilities that went far beyond family disagreements. The cyber-stalking information was particularly unsettling because it indicated the extent to which Lauren had been monitoring not just me, but also William's military career and our extended family members. She had hacked into our social media accounts, intercepted emails, and utilized sophisticated software to monitor our movements and activities. The level of surveillance was comparable to what federal investigators frequently encountered in situations involving foreign intelligence services or domestic terrorist organizations. Most damaging of all was the evidence discovered in Lauren's hotel room upon her detention. Federal authorities revealed detailed preparations for what prosecutors described as a long-term psychological warfare effort targeting military men and families. The plans included monitoring schedules for numerous military facilities, personal information research on other military wives in our town, and weapon and surveillance equipment purchasing lists. The hotel room also held what federal investigators described as a trophy collection of Lauren's previous attacks on family members and colleagues. She'd saved photos of damaged property, audio recordings of emotional discussions, and detailed notes on the psychological effects of her actions on her victims. The collection showed that Lauren's attack on our nursery was not a single incident, but rather part of a long-term pattern of predatory behavior. When the prosecutor showed images of our wrecked nursery on the courtroom screens, the effect was immediate and emotional. The meticulously painted woodland murals were reduced to holes in drywall. The upturned crib, with its components scattered on the floor. The torn rocking chair had been reupholstered with much care and expectation. The timing of the destruction, while I was giving Emily birth, added a level of brutality that caused several people in the courtroom to gasp aloud. But the prosecution did not stop at emotional damage. They methodically established how Lauren's attack met federal standards of domestic terrorism by attempting to frighten and coerce military members through violence and property destruction. The attack had been planned to cause maximum psychological damage at a time when William's emotional stability was critical to his military fitness and service duties. Federal terrorism laws were especially enacted to protect government employees and their families from precisely this type of targeted harassment. Lauren's documented threats to military installations and troops upgraded her case from domestic violence to national security danger. The sentences available under these provisions reflected how seriously the federal government took such attacks. Lauren's court-appointed attorney worked hard to depict his client as a person suffering from mental illness who acted out of envy and emotional pain, rather than with criminal intent. He advocated for psychiatric diagnosis and therapy instead of the draconian punishments requested by federal prosecutors. His presentation was polished and detailed, but it was eventually overshadowed by the overwhelming amount of evidence proving premeditation and cunning criminal planning. The psychiatric evaluation completed during Lauren's federal custody actually worked against her defense rather than for it. Federal psychologists discovered no evidence of mental disease that could explain or minimize her illegal behavior. Instead, they discovered personality abnormalities that made her more hazardous, rather than less accountable for her conduct. The evaluation concluded that Lauren was fully aware of the criminality of her actions and chose to increase her attacks despite knowing the repercussions. Lauren was finally given the opportunity to speak on her own behalf, and her testimony demonstrated the same lack of true sorrow that has defined her behavior throughout our lives. She stated that her desperate acts were motivated by family partiality and jealousy over my unfair advantages. She argued that her attack on the nursery was meant to be a wake-up call, not severe criminal behavior, and she appeared astonished that federal investigators classified her activities as terrorism rather than family dysfunction. Most tellingly, Lauren's message included repeated threats against our family, disguised as projections about future family dynamics. She stated that Emily will eventually learn the truth about her parents, and that military families are always held accountable for their decisions. The threats were subtle enough to escape immediate contempt charges, but clear enough to show that she continued to target our family for future punishment. Judge Caroline Morrison had presided over federal terrorist trials for more than a decade, and her response to Lauren's declaration was prompt and thorough. She stated that Lauren's continuing concentration on our family as targets made her an ongoing threat to public safety, necessitating permanent neutralization. Judge Morrison issued a harsh penalty. Lauren would face 18 years in federal prison for the combined offenses, with no possibility of parole under federal sentence standards. After her release, she would face 15 years on supervised probation with restrictions that would prevent her from traveling freely, accessing computers without supervision, or contacting any member of our extended family. More importantly, her conviction under federal terrorism laws would result in permanent inclusion on watch lists that would track her activities for the rest of her life. Any subsequent interaction with military personnel or installations would trigger an immediate federal inquiry and possible extra charges. She would never again be able to blend into civilian life and target vulnerable families without drawing federal attention. The civil forfeiture order was as broad, depriving Lauren of all assets obtained via her unlawful acts or utilized in support of her crimes. Her apartment lease would be canceled, her car confiscated, and her bank accounts frozen until federal authorities finished their investigation into her financial activity. She would emerge from federal jail with only the clothes given by the Bureau of Prisons. But, perhaps most significantly, Judge Morrison imposed a permanent federal restraining order that would last Lauren's entire life. Any attempt to contact our family, visit military locations, or participate in behavior judged threatening by federal authorities will result in immediate detention and extra-terrorism charges. The order was enforceable across the country and would be monitored by federal agencies with resources Lauren could never hope to avoid or overcome. Lauren's reaction as the punishment was revealed was both quick and telling. Instead of expressing regret or admitting responsibility, she screamed threats and allegations that had to be suppressed by court personnel. Her final words as she was led from the courthouse were directed at me, promising that federal jail would not shield our family indefinitely and that she would find ways to make us pay for wrecking her life. The threats were documented by court reporters and immediately added to Lauren's federal file as proof of her continuous threat to our family. They would also be used to assist federal monitoring of her jail communications and visits, ensuring that any attempt to organize retaliation from federal custody is caught and prosecuted as a separate crime. Walking out of the federal courts that day, carrying Emily in her carrier, and surrounded by the security and love of my military family, I felt something I'd never felt before in relation to Lauren. I felt utterly liberated, not simply secure from immediate danger, but truly free from decades of fear and exploitation. The sister who had tortured me since childhood was finally experiencing repercussions proportionate to the gravity of her misdeeds. General Grant's delight was palpable, but controlled, the reaction of a military officer who had successfully eliminated a threat to his family. Martha's relief was palpable, the breath of someone who had spent weeks gathering resources to safeguard her granddaughter and daughter-in-law from further harm. William's arm across my shoulders exuded the steady strength of someone who had dealt with threats abroad and had no intention of allowing domestic threats to succeed where foreign adversaries had failed. The media interest outside the courthouse was tremendous, but fleeting. Federal prosecutors used the case to send a clear message about how threats to military families would be handled. Military family advocacy groups cited Lauren's sentence as an example of justice being served, and the story spread throughout military communities as a warning to anybody who might consider targeting service personnel or their families. But for us, the courthouse steps signaled the end of Lauren's capacity to cast shadows over our happiness, and the start of a life in which we could focus on building our family without looking over our shoulders. Emily gurgled blissfully in her carrier, surrounded by grandparents who had mobilized federal resources to safeguard her and parents who had discovered their true strength when it came to defending what was most important. The drive home took us past the federal detention facility, where Lauren would spend the following few months before being moved to her permanent federal prison sentence. The building's high walls and razor wire served as a tangible reminder that some actions had consequences that could not be mitigated, negotiated, or avoided by family connections and manipulation. That evening, as we settled into our temporary accommodation while our home underwent final security enhancements and repair, I received a call from Detective Perez with one more piece of information. Lauren's federal prison assignment had been completed, and she would be serving her term in a maximum security institution in another state, without access to local assistance or family visits. Her placement had been carefully chosen to ensure that she had no opportunity to coordinate any reprisal or ongoing harassment of our family. The investigator also informed us that Lauren's case was being utilized as a training tool for law enforcement organizations around the country, illustrating how to recognize and prosecute growing threats against military families. Our experience was about protecting other families from similar attacks, giving meaning to the agony we'd been through, and ensuring that Lauren's actions would continue to serve justice long after she was sentenced. As I nursed Emily that final evening in temporary housing, hoping to return to our renovated house the next day, I realized Lauren had failed in the most fundamental way possible. She had planned to ruin my sense of security and happiness at a time when I was the most susceptible. Instead, she had reawakened resources and revealed strengths that would keep my family safe for years to come. The nursery that awaited us at home had been lovingly rebuilt by military family volunteers, outfitted with security elements to protect Emily's safety, and blessed by a community that had rallied around us during our time of need. It would be a beautiful room in which our daughter could grow up safe and loved, surrounded by individuals who took threats against military families very seriously. 6 months later, I was standing in Emily's fully rebuilt room, watching my daughter reach for the mobile that slowly swung over her crib. The woodland creatures that danced in the afternoon sunlight were even more lovely than the originals Lauren had destroyed, having been painted by military wives who sacrificed their time and talent to create something truly unique. Each brushstroke represented the love and support of a community that had rallied behind us during our darkest times. The room was not simply restored, it was altered. Enhanced security features were perfectly integrated into the exquisite design, from reinforced windows that allowed in Oregon's soft winter light to a monitoring system that was immediately linked to base security. Emily would grow up in a chamber that served as both a sanctuary and a fortress, with resources Lauren had never dreamt existed. William strolled in with Emily's midday bottle, his movements assured and calm, demonstrating how much our lives had steadied since Lauren's incarceration. The hypervigilance that had marked his first weeks as a father had given way to the natural watchfulness of a protective parent, rather than the tactical knowledge of someone expecting an attack. He'd returned to full active duty 3 months earlier, confident that his family was secured by mechanisms that would be in place indefinitely. Emily had grown into a surprisingly serene and happy baby, as if she realized she was surrounded by people who would go to any length to keep her safe. Her pediatrician frequently remarked on her advanced growth and cheerful demeanor, remarking that children raised in safe, caring surroundings typically thrived in this manner. The stress of her birth conditions had no lasting impact on her growth or character. The prosecution had kept us updated about Lauren's transition to federal prison, but the updates were brief and clinical. She was placed in administrative segregation for her own safety after making threats against other convicts with military family connections. Her jail communications were monitored under federal terrorism guidelines, and multiple attempts to send letters to our family were intercepted and added to her file as evidence of ongoing court order violations. The legal case had ended the previous month with a settlement that would cover Emily's college tuition and give support for other military families facing similar threats. Lauren's insurance company first attempted to reject compensation, claiming that her activities constituted terrorism rather than covered incidents, but federal prosecutors pursued the case with the same persistence as during the criminal trials. More crucially, Lauren's case influenced reforms in federal law enforcement processes for evaluating threats to military families. The FBI had formed specialist sections to track and prosecute domestic terrorism cases involving government staff, using Lauren's pattern of behavior as a model for detecting similar threats before they developed into violence. My relationship with my mother had grown deeper and more honest than it had ever been before. The realization of Lauren's true character led her to confront decades of enabling behavior and misdirected familial loyalty. She'd gone to counseling to work through her own guilt and had become an advocate for other family members living with harmful relatives. Her transformation, from enabler to guardian, was as profound as anyone else's. My father had astonished everyone by serving as a consistent source of support throughout the court proceedings. His veterinarian practice had given him experience dealing with violent animals, and he used those insights to better understand Lauren's behavior patterns, assisting federal investigators in building their case. His quiet strength had been just what our family required during the months of uncertainty and legal intricacy. Martha had departed to California after Lauren's imprisonment, but she had left behind a network of support and protection that would be active for years to come. Military spouse communities had welcomed me and Emily as examples of perseverance and the value of family protection, fostering bonds that went far beyond simple friendship to true sisterhood. The repair effort had made the mansion more magnificent and secure than it had ever been. Military contractors reinforced the doors and windows, modernized the security system, and improved the overall structure while preserving the original charm and character. Lauren's strike had left us with a home that was far stronger than before. Emily stirred in her crib, making little sounds that signaled she was ready for her afternoon meal. I carried her into my arms, amazed at how much she had grown and how well she fit into our lives. Her presence had acted as a catalyst for all that followed, bringing together so many people to safeguard our family and ensure that threats like Lauren's would never happen again. As I nestled into the rocking chair, which had been restored with even more comfort and elegance than the original, I reflected on the woman I was before Emily's birth and Lauren's attack. That person had been reactive, constantly attempting to manage Lauren's conduct and reduce conflict rather than addressing the root cause. She had been isolated, relying on family dynamics that valued peace over protection. The woman seated in this chair was fundamentally different. She recognized her own value and the power of the community that supported her. She'd learned to spot hazards early on and respond with overwhelming force rather than waiting for gradual improvement. Most crucially, she found that true family safety sometimes entailed permanently separating from hazardous family members, rather than continuing to tolerate their rising conduct. Emily sank into feeding with a pleased efficiency that permeated all of her actions, her small palm holding my finger with remarkable power. Looking down at her flawless face, I felt intense gratitude for Lauren's attack, not for the anguish it had inflicted, but for the power it had shown, and the protection it had summoned. Our daughter would grow up in a family that had proved its ability to protect what was most important. The afternoon light coming through the reinforced windows created rainbow patterns on the wood's painting, creating an almost mystical mood in the chamber that had before been completely damaged. The beauty was deeper now, because it had been constructed with purpose and caring by people who recognized its importance. Every feature was carefully chosen, not only for its aesthetic value, but also for the message it conveyed about resilience and rejuvenation. William entered in the doorway, carrying his laptop and sliding into the reading chair to work while remaining close to his family. His presence was both reassuring and protective, the steady dependability of someone who had encountered true threats abroad and knew the difference between real danger and staged theatrics. Lauren's attack was serious enough, but the response was so thorough that any further threats appeared practically impossible. The monthly security briefings we received from base personnel had become normal rather than urgent, updates on a well-managed situation rather than warnings about potential threats. Lauren's jail communications were still being monitored, but the intercepted conversations revealed that she was more concerned with surviving in federal custody than with organizing future vengeance. The magnitude of her defeat appeared to have finally penetrated her delusions of control. Emily completed nursing and gazed up at me with her alert expression, which became more common as she grew and developed. Her eyes reflected the same steady intelligence I'd admired in her father, yet there was something distinct about the way she viewed her surroundings. She would grow up knowing that she was safe and respected, surrounded by individuals who had demonstrated their concern for her well-being. The knock on our front door that afternoon delivered news that perfectly wrapped up Lauren's narrative. Detective Perez had come to inform us that Lauren's embezzlement case had resulted in new federal charges, which would increase her jail sentence by 8 years. Most crucially, her former employer consented to testify in other cases involving similar financial offenses. The detective also informed Lauren that her former roommate and business partner had filed a civil complaint, claiming compensation for the sabotage and devastation they had experienced. The federal conviction made the civil cases much easier to prove, and the settlements ensured that Lauren's victims were compensated while she remained financially devastated for the rest of her life. The most important information was that Lauren's case was being used in federal law enforcement training programs to demonstrate how to identify and prosecute increasing threats against government people. Her tale would serve justice for years to come, protecting other families from similar attacks and ensuring that her crimes had a lasting impact beyond our personal experience. That evening, while we prepared Emily for her bedtime routine in the nursery, which had come to represent resilience and rejuvenation, William and I discussed our future plans. His next promotion was expected within a year, possibly accompanied by a move to a new base where we could continue to build our lives together. The prospect of moving no longer seemed daunting because we knew our protection and support network would accompany us wherever the military assigned us. Emily's bedtime routine had become a treasured tradition, from her bath in the bathroom adjacent to the nursery to the books we read in the comfy rocker near her cot. She was beginning to express preferences for certain books and songs, forming an individual personality that would distinguish her while carrying the strength and security of her military family background. As I placed Emily in her cot and watched her fall asleep with the contentment of a kid who had never experienced genuine insecurity, I reflected on how Lauren's attack had radically changed our life. The lady who had attempted to destroy our happiness at our most vulnerable time had instead unlocked resources and revealed strengths that would defend our family for years to come. The mobile above Emily's crib rotated slowly in the mild air current provided by the heating system, creating dancing shadows of woodland creatures on the walls that had been lovingly and carefully repaired. Each shadow signified not only artistic beauty, but also the protective community that had surrounded us in our time of need and would continue to do so for many years. William's hand on my shoulder as we stood watching our daughter sleep contained all the warmth and strength I'd grown to love years before, but it also carried new depths of protectiveness and dedication formed throughout our trial by fire. We'd been through the worst of family dysfunction and emerged stronger, more connected, and better protected than we'd ever been. The home fell silent around us in the evening, the soothing hum of the security system serving as a reassuring reminder that we were safeguarded by technology and human networks that Lauren could never have foreseen or overcome. Emily slept soundly in her renovated nursery, surrounded by beauty that had been carefully and lovingly reconstructed by individuals who knew what they were conserving. Walking back to our bedroom that night, I took a moment to look out the window at the neighborhood street where we had created our lives together. The regular suburban site had special significance since we had battled to protect it and had the support to keep it safe. Our house was no longer merely a home, it was a fortress based on military family solidarity and community support. The woman who had once walked on eggshells around a dangerous family member was gone for good, replaced by someone who recognized her own power and the strength of her protective group. Lauren had wanted to educate me that I was vulnerable and alone. But she'd taught me that I was loved and protected by individuals who would go to any length to keep my family safe. Emily would grow up knowing that story, understanding that her birth into the world had been marked not by devastation, but by the mobilization of love and protection that would surround her for the rest of her days. The wrecked and reconstructed nursery would always remind her that beautiful things might arise from awful circumstances when rebuilt by people who genuinely cared. Years later, when Emily was old enough to grasp the entire tale of her birth and the attack that followed, she would discover that wicked actions can reveal unexpected strength, and that true family is defined not by biological links, but by individuals who choose to defend and support one another. The military community knew who our true family was, and what they could do when anything they protected was threatened. The military community that had welcomed us during our crisis would remain part of Emily's extended family as she got older, presenting her with role models of fortitude, service, and dedication to protecting others. She would realize from an early age that some individuals devote their lives to safeguarding what is most important, and that she was lucky to be a member of that group. The renovated nursery would always be more than just a space for our daughter to sleep and play. It would represent resilience, renewal, and the strength of community support to overcome individual hatred. Every exquisite detail would tell us that love and protection could rebuild anything that hatred attempted to destroy. Her seclusion and selfishness had blinded her to the fact that military families are never truly alone, without resources, or without individuals willing to fight for them. Her loss was complete and irreversible, acting as a warning to anyone else who might consider similar acts. As I fell asleep that night, holding my husband's hand and listening to our daughter's calm breathing in the next room, I felt the deep satisfaction of someone who has been tested and triumphed. Not because we defeated Lauren, but because we realized how strong we were and how well protected our family would always be. And as this story fades into the shadows of your mind, disappearing into the silent regions where memory and mystery intersect, remember that it was never simply a story. It was an awakening. A raw pulse of human reality encased in whispered secrets and hidden emotions. Every word is a shard, a fragmented reality. Every sentence is a link between worlds seen and unseen, between the brightness of disclosure and the darkness of what stays unsaid. Stories work their most powerful magic in this liminal area, stirring the deepest recesses of your soul, inciting the hidden fears, buried desires, and fragile hopes that cling to your heart like frail embers. This is the power of these stories, these digital confessions shouted into the vacuum, where anonymity serves as a disguise for truth, and each viewer becomes the custodian of secrets too heavy to bear alone. And now that secret, that trembling echo of someone else's reality, has become part of your own shadowed narrative, intertwining with your thoughts, awakening that undeniable curiosity, that insatiable hunger to know what lies beyond, what stories have yet to be told, and what mysteries hover just out of reach, waiting for you to discover them. So cling on to this feeling, this electrifying thread of wonder and anxiety, since it is what binds us all together across the great unseen web of human existence. If your heart races and your imagination wanders to the what-ifs and maybes, you know the story has done its job. Its charm has knitted itself into the very fabric of your existence. So, before you leave this realm, know this. Every story you hear here is a whispered invitation to explore deeper, listen more, and accept both the darkness and the light. And if you found yourself lost, or even somewhat changed, honor this connection by keeping the flame lit. If the narrative left you haunted, please like this video, subscribe to join the fraternity of seekers pursuing invisible truths, and ring the bell to be the first to greet the next confession, shadow, or revelation waiting to emerge from the depths. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we summon them. We become containers for the forgotten, concealed, and unheard.